And we welcome you back to another episode of the Tuesday Night Tailgate. This will be a special Halloween-themed episode. Joining us before the podcast was Coach Steve Spurrier, who was kind enough to give us a live performance of his latest single, Spooky Scary Skeletons. I am your host, Luke. I am happy to bring with me my co-host, Tim, who's up in Connecticut. Tim, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, it's good to have Spurrier there, you know. We all heard that he signed with CAA. We figured it was going to be for a media deal, not a Halloween single, but good to hear him back in the music business. So, yeah, we're happy to be here for episode 2. You know, if you want to hit us up on Twitter, email, we're always open to suggestions because we're just starting out on this. So on Twitter, we're at the TNT Pod, or you can email us at TuesdayNightTailgate@gmail.com. Any suggestions, criticisms, we'll take it all. So, Luke, I think it's time to get started, and as we're always going to get started here, we're going to start off with the Tuesday Night Tailgate drinking game. It's a tailgate. I like to drink during tailgates. I got my beer here. I got my little bucket next to me. So, basically what the drinking game is in my mind, I have a certain trigger for each show. It's going to be different each show. Last week, every time a mascot was mentioned, I took a drink, and I play this sound every time either Luke or I triggers the word. Obviously, if you listened last week, you know, we didn't say the mascots too often, so I think I got a good one for today. At the end of Tuesday Night Tailgate, Luke, you're going to try to guess what the trigger was for this week's episode. You up to it?
Tim, I'm certainly up to it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to another great episode. And I just want to remind everyone that we're trying out a lot of new things this week. As you can see, we've got live video, we've got images. We're trying to make it a little more interactive, and we certainly welcome any comments, criticisms, praise. If you hated it, if you liked it, let us know. So, Tim, why don't you go ahead and take us away? I'm ready to get started on the drinking game. Hope you can have some good suds tonight. And I'm ready to talk football. How about you?
Let's talk football. And, you know, our first football-related segment, other than talking about the show and the drinking game, is our weekly top 10. So, Luke, 2 top 10 teams lost this week, so I'm sure we have a little bit of shuffling. Consistency has always been our theme here. So here was last week's official TNT top 10. So last week we had Ohio State at number 1. Oh, we got it on the screen there. So
Yeah.
we had Ohio State at number 1. We had Baylor 2, followed by TCU and Utah. That's where Luke and I disagreed a little bit. But obviously I think we're going to agree a little bit this week because of Utah losing. Then we had LSU, Michigan State, Clemson, Alabama, Florida State, and Iowa and Notre Dame got in there with as our number 10s following last week. So, Luke, let's start off with the top 4. Obviously, we're both going to have Utah dropping out of this top 5 that we had last week. Otherwise, we still kind of had that Ohio State, Baylor, TCU, LSU. Do you have any changes to your top 4 this week?
I do. The same 1 and 2, Ohio State and Baylor. I think we'll probably both be in agreement there. But what I did this week, you know, TCU had the bye week. I wasn't particularly impressed with their performance coming into the bye. They didn't play a great game against BYE. So what I did was I moved LSU up to number 3. And if you want my number 4, obviously with Utah being gone, I've got Clemson off that strong Miami win at number 4.
All right, well, I have a very similar top 4 from the previous week. I still have Ohio State and Baylor at 1 and 2. I mean, Ohio State changing their quarterback was big for me. You know, now we're seeing the Ohio State offense that we expected coming into the season. So I think that they're going to be solidified into number 1 until they lose. And Baylor's just looked tremendous all season. So it's just impossible right now to even to drop them down. I still have TCU at number 3. I agree with you. There's been, you know, coming off the bye, they had that tough game, but their offense is just so good. I mean, their offense is just so good that it's hard for me to drop them even in an off week. And I do have LSU still at number 4. So take me to your number 5 then, because I have Clemson at number 5. I didn't put Clemson up too high even with that big win over Miami, because to me they looked good. It was an impressive win, but it was against a really, really bad Miami team. So I want to see what they do against a better team. But explain your number 5 to me.
Well, I agree with you. I think in my opinion, I think they earned that spot, and they certainly look like they're the top of the ACC right now and being undefeated. If we're going to slot in 1 to 4, and of course you don't try and project out into what teams in your top 10, you don't try and project how you think a team will go the rest of the year, how you think they're going to play. I'm just looking at how they played this week, and Clemson got the bump over TCU for me. And of course, you're going to argue with Baylor and TCU. Only one can be there at the end of the season since they play each other. But that's how it was for me. So with number 5, I do have TCU. So we're pretty similar right in there.
Yeah, and I still have TCU at number 3. I guess in the top 5, that's the disagreement. We obviously both agree that LSU is ahead of Clemson there, but yeah, I mean, like you said, with TCU, it's tough to gauge where they are right now, and they haven't really played a lot of really tough games yet. They do have their Big 12 schedule really starting up towards the end of the season, but this is going to change. I mean, you got TCU is going to be playing Baylor. Clemson's got Florida State coming up at some point. LSU's got Alabama after the bye. Ohio State's got Michigan. You have no idea how this is going to go. So this is obviously not a prediction of how the season's going to end, but we're pretty similar on who the top 5 teams are going into Tailgate. So then, even with the 6, 7, 8 coming into this week, we had the same teams there, but we had teams ordered a little differently in last week's top 10. So who is your 6, 7, 8 going into this week?
Even with those shakeups, I've still got Michigan State and Alabama at 6 and 7. They stayed in the same spot as last week. 8 through 10, yeah, I agree. We're going to have some shakeups with the Utah and the FSU losses. I've got Notre Dame moving up from number 10 last week to number 8 this week. I like where they're at slightly, a little bit more going ahead than Stanford or some of the other one-loss teams. So I've got Notre Dame in there.
Yeah, and I'm pretty much the same. I have the Michigan State and the Alabama at the 6, 7. Both teams kind of struggled a little bit at times during their games this week, so it wasn't like I was going to move them up, but obviously I had to move them up because of the Utah loss. And I'm sticking with my number 10 that I had last week, moving up to number 8, Iowa coming off the bye. I still feel like their defense is good enough to warrant the top 10 this year. So I moved them up to 8. It's solely because they didn't play, and 2 teams in the top 10 didn't.
Sure. Well, with number 9 for me, this is where we're probably going to have, who do you want to slot in here? I just mentioned Stanford earlier. I've got Stanford coming in as one of those hot one-loss teams at number 9, just behind Notre Dame. And then at number 10, which you'll probably be like, what the heck are you doing? I've got Oklahoma State at number 10. Wanted to give them a shout-out this week, obviously with the tragedy in Stillwater. Certainly thoughts and prayers go out to the Cowboys family. But, Oklahoma State, they look good right now. Of course, everyone should wipe the floor with Kansas. But their schedule, like a lot of the other Big 12 teams, it's so backloaded. But they deserve some love right now because they can put anyone in at quarterback and win. And they've been doing that. Between Rudolph and Walsh, they looked really good.
Well, Luke, you're saying that I'm going to say, what the hell is he thinking? I have the same 9-10. I have Stanford at number 9. I have Oklahoma State at number 10. And the funny thing is, I thought you were going to say the same thing about my Oklahoma State at number 10, mostly because that means that I'm leaving Notre Dame out. Stanford, to me, was an easy number 9. I think that they're, despite the week 1 loss, they're the most complete team in football right now. I mean, they just, on every aspect of the game, they are just playing fantastic football. They stumbled out of the gate. So I put them even over that undefeated Oklahoma State. I made a point last week of mentioning with my top 10s, to me, if you lose a game, you're dropping a little bit, and that's why I had Iowa in there over Notre Dame last week. But I put Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State and Notre Dame was tough for me because Oklahoma State hasn't had any real quality opponents yet either. So Notre Dame's played some good teams. They've even played some, American Athletic Conference teams such as Navy that are not powerhouse teams but have good programs this season. It was really tough. I mean, it was almost a tie for me, but Oklahoma State, like you said, coming off a very impressive victory, I had to give them that accolades and put them at number 10 there.
So last week I know you had Iowa at number 10. Obviously they had a bye. I'm guessing Oklahoma State's victory over Kansas was enough for you to push them forward, and that we both agree Iowa's not a top 10 team.
I'm sorry?
I'm guessing you both agree that we both agree Iowa's not a top 10 team right now.
Well, I have Iowa at number 8 right now.
Oh, you moved them up there. I didn't
Yeah.
even realize that. We must have skipped over that.
No,
Uh,
yeah, as I said, Iowa, even despite the off week, I didn't want to move them down. I didn't want to move them up, but I had to move them up
you
because
had
Florida
to because you
State
had them
and
at 10.
Utah. Yeah. So I
Right.
really, I have Iowa in the same spot as I did last week. I just have them at number 8 this week.
All right. Well, I will say this, that if you do want to incorporate looking forward, I think Iowa's got the best chance out of any team in the country to remain undefeated until their conference championship game. Things
And
look
I
really good for the Hawkeyes.
and I can't disagree with that. I mean, they have a pretty easy schedule, and then they're going to have to, play a pretty tough Big Ten championship, presumably. But
Up till then, that's when I think that they have the best chance. But we'll talk more Iowa going forward. So Tim, who do you think is going to be the top 4 this week? We've talked about college football playoffs. Everything up to this point is AP poll, coaches poll, those kinds of things. This is really going to be our first week with the first college football playoff committee releasing their first poll. It's the only poll that matters anymore. So who are our top 4 right now?
so our top 4 right now, since we agreed on the official top 5 being Ohio State, Baylor, LSU, Clemson, TCU. We were wondering about that Baylor TCU because we both agree, and we've talked about this in great length all season. Right now, it's impossible. You can't put 2 teams in one conference in right now because you have too many undefeated teams. You have too many good programs right now. So right now, it looks like our top 4 is Ohio State at number 1 playing number 4 Clemson, and number 2 Baylor playing number 3 LSU in those 2 playoff semifinals.
And certainly the likelihood of getting in 2 teams in the same conference, they'd have to be really good. But that Big 12 no conference championship game, once again, could hurt them in the end.
And I mean, we'll talk about the Big 12 more when we do who's in, who's out, but the chances of them getting an undefeated team are still very good because
Oh, absolutely.
Baylor and TCU, I mean, Oklahoma State, great teams, not even on the same level as Baylor and TCU.
Absolutely. Well, that about wraps it up for our top 10 segment. Tim, why don't you take it into, I know, one of your favorite segments. This will be Tim's Corned Beef Reuben Player of the Week. Take it away.
Oh, this is absolutely my favorite segment of the week. This is where I get to talk about the guys that you maybe never heard of. The number 3 running back, or that's a good-looking Reuben that we have on the screen right there. These are the guys that you don't talk too much about, and they don't get too much of the credit. Last week's winner was Jalen Watts-Jackson with just the unbelievable play at the end of that Michigan State game. And he was very excited. He actually favorited our tweet on Twitter this week. He was really pumped that he was the Corned Beef Reuben Player of the Week.
I love that.
I'm going to give a shout-out to him because that was great. I do have an honorable mention this week on that same type of level. Patrick Gamble and Lance Austin of Georgia Tech. Those are the guys that blocked and then returned the kick. I know we're going to talk about that more. I don't want the Corned Beef Reuben Player of the Week winner to always be just the outstanding play because it's not just about that. So I kind of want to get away from that, and neither one of them had any other stats really in the game, so it's an honorable mention, but they're not a winner or a runner-up this week. Runner-up number 1, Luke, you're going to like this one. Ardarius Stewart, wide receiver out of Alabama.
Big man.
I was watching this game, and with the Alabama-Tennessee game, you expected a lot of run, you expected a lot of defense, and you got that in the game. But towards the end of this game, Alabama was struggling. Tennessee hung around in the game. Every time I heard that Alabama got a big play, I heard Ardarius Stewart's name. He didn't have any fantastic catches. He had that one that was reviewed at the end of the game. He had 6 catches for 84 yards, which isn't knocking the roof off. But every single third down conversion, this guy was catching the ball. And it was all in the fourth quarter. So, I mean, Luke, do you want to chime in? Did you like this Ardarius Stewart guy as a runner-up number 1?
Absolutely. I loved it. Ardarius Stewart, he was key. Jake Coker leading Alabama down the field with 5 minutes left, down by a point. Ardarius Stewart caught that pass early on in the drive for 29 yards. That's a quarter of the field right there. Him and Calvin Ridley right up there with him. So I absolutely agree. Love it. He's a great playmaker.
I knew you would like that one. So runner-up number 2. Last week, we had the kicker from Pittsburgh be a runner-up. This week, we have the punter from Pittsburgh with the runner-up. And I tell you, it's not because he punted all that great. He did. He had 2 punts inside the 20. Both led to better field position the next drive, because on both of those punts that were inside the 20, Syracuse on the next play had a 3-and-out, so they got the ball in better position. So he really helped them. He had a 50-yard punt as well that wasn't one of the ones that was in the 20. But the reason he's on here is because about 5 minutes left in the game, 4th down conversion, it's a fake punt. He throws the ball to linebacker Matt Galambos. We're not going to be able to recognize punters too often, but a big, big play there. He looked like he was a quarterback. I looked it up. He never played quarterback. He's always been a punter. So, and then after that first down that they got there, Pittsburgh held the ball the rest of the game, and then, of course, blew it with the game winner. But, Luke, 2 fun facts about Ryan Winslow and the guy who caught it, Matt Galambos. So Matt Galambos, the linebacker who caught it, he went to the Haverford School. He's that's 2.5 miles away from Villanova, where we went to college. But Winslow, and I only found this after I decided he was runner-up number 2, so he didn't get any special treatment. His dad, George Winslow, was the first Wisconsin punter ever on scholarship, but then he transferred and graduated from Villanova University. So
Wow.
2 Villanova connections in that big Pittsburgh play this weekend.
That is some deep research.
Hey, I look into these guys. You're not getting the corned beef Reuben if I don't like you, and I better like you, and I like these guys.
All right.
But our winner this week is wide receiver Zach Wright from Rice. Now, I'm sure all of you watched the Rice Army game this weekend. I know that I was.
Yeah, what channel was that on?
It was on CBS Sports Network, I believe, because that's where all those Army, Air Force, Navy games get played. I did not watch the game. I had to find this after the fact, and I found this on Sunday. The stat line, again, it's not the greatest stat line in the world. He had 6 catches for 79 yards, and he caught a 12-yard touchdown with 24 seconds left in the game. If you go back and look at the highlights, it was pouring rain at this game. So the catch itself just looked aesthetically pleasing. But since I'm sure none of you saw the Rice Army highlights, here's the quote that he had after the game, and I can tell you it perfectly depicts what this pass looked like from just 12 yards away. It was the ugliest, most beautiful ball I've ever seen. I thought he punted it. I owed him one from earlier. I almost got it in the end zone earlier in the game, so I knew I needed to get one for Dreyfus, referring to Dreyfus Jackson, the quarterback. From 12 yards back, the ball clearly slipped out of his hands. It looked like he was throwing the ball out of the end zone, but then it went 10 feet in the air, and he's, Zach Wright's all alone, catches it, game over. And, he's complaining, he was saying after the game, too, that, he didn't think the ball was going to get to him, that, the ball slipped out of his hands. I'm a New York Giants fan. I've seen the Odell Beckham Jr. catch. I've seen the 2 Super Bowl catches. Zach, when the quarterback doesn't throw the ball right and you get that ball, that's all on you, and that's why you're the Corned Beef Reuben Player of the Week this week.
All right. Well, I like that. That's a great analysis. Did not expect to see that much. And if we can find a clip to put up in the video info, the comments section on YouTube, or the About the Video, we'll try and put that on there for all the listeners out there, because that's certainly one that I didn't see, but I do appreciate the good research. So while we're on the subject of food, very briefly, I'm going to talk about my sliders of the week. These are junior players, and they're things, Tim, I like 3 things. I like really good quarterback play, very good defense, especially interceptions, and I love special teams. So to kick us off, my number 1 slider this week, I might as well name this segment the Luke Zone, because Luke Falk of Washington State leads the way for me again. He had another 5-touchdown game and over 500 yards passing this week against Arizona, 4 of them to honorary slider Gabe Marks. He's incredible. They got that big game against Stanford coming up, and watch out, Washington State is in 2nd place in the Pac-12 North. Sticking in the Pac-12, I'm going to go with Southern Cal freshman linebacker Cameron Smith. He led the Trojans with 9 tackles. He had 3 interceptions and 1 return for a 54-yard touchdown. He was absolutely critical in that win against Utah to knock them into the list of teams with 1 loss. And finally, once again in the Pac-12, I'm a West Coast guy this week, it seems, UCLA kicker Kaimi Fairbairn. 4 field goals in a 40-24 win over Cal, including a 60-yarder. Kaimi's 17 points away from tying the school record of 390 held by John Lee. So with the season about two-thirds of the way done, I think Fairbairn's going to hold that school record for quite a while. But that wraps it up for me on the slider segment. Tim, why don't we move on over, while we're still on the subject of food, and this is a tailgate, let's talk about what we ate this week.
Yeah, so I was home this weekend. I was watching all the games. I have a pretty good TV setup. I got 2 TVs hooked up to the cable, one to the Chromecast. I got my backup computer, and I got my tablet. So I'm all set for these college football Saturdays. For around lunchtime, I like to keep it simple for the early games, and I woke up a little late, so I didn't really have breakfast. I'll tell you, Sabra spicy guacamole is delicious. I can eat chips with that stuff all day, and I crushed that during lunchtime yesterday. That took me a solid 2 hours of just eating potato chips and Sabra spicy guacamole. But for nighttime, Luke, I love my nachos.
You do.
I love my nachos. It's the easiest thing in the world to cook, so I changed it up a little bit. I did some actual cooking with my nachos this week.
Wow.
I did this week bacon cheeseburger Dorito nachos. Let me repeat that. Bacon cheeseburger Dorito nachos. I used Doritos as the nachos. Delicious. Great way to make nachos. And I just put some, it didn't even need guac or sour cream or salsa or anything because, you have meat and bacon on there. So it was delicious.
That sounds fantastic. I was down in Tuscaloosa this weekend for the third Saturday in October, and I actually took it pretty light on eating this week. It was a 2:30 kickoff game, so I started out, woke up, showered, skipped breakfast, went straight to tailgate about 5 hours before the game. Ran through a bunch of Michelob Ultras in the parking garage, met up with my parents for sandwiches at Which, had a nice buffalo chicken with ranch, blue cheese, lettuce, jalapenos, all the good stuff. Had a few more beers, hit the strip in Tuscaloosa, had some Yellowhammers at Galette's, my favorite bar, for game day. I hit the game where I proceeded to have some bourbon and Cokes, and then I had dinner with my parents again. So all my food was paid for, luckily. Didn't have to spend a dime there.
So most of your eats are drinks.
But most of my eats are drinks, which they tend to be on game days when I'm actually at the game. But we did hit Mugshots Bar and Grill in Tuscaloosa after the game, where I had a delicious Seville burger and fries. Continued drinking after that at Innisfree down in Tuscaloosa. On the way home, stopped at Walgreens, was not done eating yet. Sometime after midnight, grabbed myself a bottle of chocolate milk and a 100 grand candy bar to close out the day for all the food that I ate. Why? Well, I guess I'd been drinking, and that's what I wanted. Before we get into the who's in and who's out of the playoffs, we like to have some hot takes on this segment. So what I think I'm going to do is I'll get us started this week, and I'm going to be talking about ESPN College Game Day. And College Game Day, in my opinion, they're out of touch with college football fans. The intro is awful. No one likes that song. We're sick of hearing "Coming to Your City." It's not cool. Is it country? Is it rock? Is it hip-hop? No one knows. No one likes it. No one likes the segments. You have Bear betting against the spread, and he has his little bank that he puts it. I was watching a little bit this weekend. The guy was 10-10 going into the weekend. Why do you keep focusing on that? And I saw this week that they have some social media intern who acts like they have influence on the show. They're posting in Reddit, subreddit CFB, which is the big college football subreddit. And I don't know what the purpose of that is. Is it to try and actually get ideas? Is it to just steal memes and images or something like that? I don't know. And I'm kind of spoiled being an Alabama fan, and then I have the opportunity to go to College Game Day several times a year, but I never do. Because all College Game Day is standing around with nothing to do. You stand around, you cheer, they go to commercial, you do that for 50 more times. It's so drawn out. There's hardly any actual X's and O's talk anymore. It's all about uplifting stories and where this quarterback came from. There's almost no analysis, and then they get to the end, there's 8 minutes left, and they have to rush through picks of 5 or 6 games with the headgear selection. growing up, I would always wake up really early. It was 8 o'clock Central Time, and I'd always watch it. But now, I really don't even care. I never even watch it unless I'm awake or not at a game. So pretty much I'm fed up with college game day, and that's all I have on the subject.
Well, Luke, I'm fed up with something as well. I'm fed up with the Aflac trivia question. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the Aflac trivia question, but there are three types of Aflac trivia questions. First, there's the kind that when they ask the question, it makes you stop paying attention to the game because you're trying to think of the answer. Now, you gave me two Aflac trivia questions last week on the podcast. The one that I thought fit that category was the one about the two SEC coaches that were the winningest coaches for two SEC schools. I stopped the podcast to try to answer that, and I only got one of them correct. If I thought a little bit harder, I probably could have gotten Bryant, but we couldn't just wait around 5 minutes for me to figure that out. Those are the great Aflac trivia questions. Then you have the good ones that are, you have to ask something, and they're not all going to be gold. And that was similar to the last time Memphis beat a top 25 team Aflac trivia question, which the answer was Tennessee back in the Peyton Manning days. But then you have just terrible Aflac trivia questions that just get you mad. I'm watching the Cal-UCLA game on Thursday. The Aflac trivia question was, when was the last time both Cal and UCLA were both in the top 25? The answer was September 1993. How am I supposed to guess that? First off, neither one of them is in the top 25 right now, so it's completely irrelevant. You're just picking, both teams are in the question. And even if UCLA beats Cal, which they did, they're not going to both be in the top 25. So I don't know what they were like. Was I just supposed to casually guess, oh, yeah, I remember back in September 1993, they were both in the AP poll. Then during the Ohio State-Rutgers game, there was this question. When was the last time AP number 1 went on the road and lost to an unranked opponent? Ohio State was up 21-0 at the time. They won that game big. Rutgers clearly was not going to win that game, and the answer was 2008 USC at Oregon State. I spent the entire time trying to guess when Ohio State lost number 1, unranked on the road. Obviously, Rutgers never was. So then I moved on to other Big Ten teams trying to think when Michigan State might have done it or when Michigan did. What does USC Oregon State in 2008 have to do with this game? Who cares? It's a 21-0 game, Ohio State, so it makes me mad. And then Stanford, Washington, this type of question you get. Kevin Hogan is second among current FBS QBs in career wins. Who's number 1? The answer is Connor Cook, but what does he have to do with that game? That's literally you just coming up with a random stat that you wanted to bring up during the broadcast and choose to jeopardy with it and form it into, a question. Some of these Aflac trivia questions are so lazy. Get better.
I agree with you, Tim. I heard some of those, and I could not agree with you more. But now that we got some hot takes out of the way, I think it's time for us to do our big portion of the broadcast, and that's to move on to who's in and who's out. This is a segment that really is what started this podcast, and we keep track every week of who's in and who's out of the college football playoffs, who's got a shot and who doesn't. As you can see, playoffs on the screen up there. So we entered this week with, I believe, 27 teams having a shot. ESPN said something like 26. And Tim and I keep track of this every week using a color-coded system in our spreadsheet. So basically, if we say a team has no highlight or no color, a team is in great shape and they control their own destiny. If a team is yellow, it means a team can lose again and still have a shot. Yellow with an asterisk, a loss to the wrong team means you're out. Red means doesn't matter who you lose to and you're out. And I'm sorry to all these other teams that we kind of glance over, but we do have a lot of teams to talk about in a limited time. But if we don't talk about you, you've got no shot. So I would say let's go ahead and get things started underway in the American Conference, one of these undefeated teams, the Temple Owls. This was a Thursday night game. They played at East Carolina. Temple won the game 24-14, and I got to watch all of this game, and I know you did too, Tim. But for me, ECU players, right out of the gate, they were aggressively stupid. They lost a lot of yardage throughout the game. There was very bad, terrible officiating on both sides. ECU had 2 punts blocked. Temple got these 14 points in the fourth quarter to win, but Temple, to me, they did not win this game by 10. ECU lost it.
Yeah, and we were talking during this game because we were on Google together chatting about this game, and that's exactly what we had said when this game was 14-10. Before Temple even took the lead, we said Temple's not going to win this game. ECU is going to give them this game, and we both knew that Temple was going to win because Jihad Thomas and they have some other decent players, but they both just looked completely sloppy. And I don't know if it's because Temple's looking ahead to Notre Dame or if it's the Thursday night game effect or something. That's the first time I've had the chance to sit down and watch Temple. I've seen I saw Penn State a little bit early on. I saw one other game in passing. That's the first time I sat down and looked at Temple, and I was not impressed with them. They just did not look that good. They didn't look like a fluid team. But again, they won the game, so it's hard. You can't eliminate them for winning a game. And look, full disclosure, I hate Temple. Cannot stand Temple. Your best alumni is Bill Cosby. I hope that Notre Dame just goes out and crushes Temple next week. So, stop talking about Temple. I don't think they're a good team at all. They, other than the Penn State game, they haven't played anybody. I see this team as losing 3 games this season. I'm ready to take them off, but you can't do that with the 7-0 team.
Yeah, I agree. I think one loss and they're out of the playoff conversation completely. But Temple's got those games against Notre Dame. Certainly College Game Day is going to be there next week. Broadcasting live from Independence Hall, it looks like. They've got an away game at Southern Methodist. They've got Southern Florida away. They've got Memphis at home and UConn at home. So really, aside from Notre Dame, Memphis is going to be their big test out of all those teams, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, we'll keep them red this week, and we are going to move on to the next team, another undefeated team from the American Conference, Houston. Now, Houston played down at Central Florida this weekend and absolutely blew Central Florida out of the water, it looked like. But they came out sputtering, in my opinion, in the first few drives, but they scored 52 unanswered points. They absolutely crushed George O'Leary's Knights team. And it's a shame to me. I know we don't talk really about programs that don't have a shot, but what's happened to this UCF programs, just a few years ago, they were one of the best programs in the G5.
Yeah, I mean, they beat Baylor in the Fiesta Bowl. What was it, 2 years ago? They were ranked number 10 that year to finish off the year. I mean, UCF is just – there's no wonder, and I'm going to get to this a little bit later as well. There's no wonder George O'Leary just left this team because they're just an atrocious team right now. And I was watching this game pretty closely, too, because Greg Ward Jr. is my favorite quarterback in college football right now under this Tom Herman offense. I really like this Houston team. Of all the American athletic teams, a lot of people saying Memphis might be the best because they have some of those quality wins. I think Houston's the best team in this conference. They have the number 9 overall offense and the number 35 overall defense. So who's to say that they aren't a legitimate team along with some of these, Big Ten school, Big Ten Iowa or even the Oklahoma State and Big 12? Who's to say that they aren't on that same level as those teams? I really love this Houston team. I agree with you, though. The first half of this game, they really struggled, and I never really saw it as, hey, they might lose this game, but I thought it was going to be close. And when you think a game's going to be close going into, let's say halftime, and they win by 49, you got enough offensive explosion to be able to just beat teams and beat them good.
Well, you mentioned Greg Ward. He has he's their quarterback. He has as many rushing touchdowns as Leonard Fournette does, and tack on 10 passing touchdowns. And they've got a good running game, too. Kenneth Farrow's a really good running back. And their defense, again, they have a plus 15 turnover differential. That's critical.
Exactly. And when you have that good an offense and then you're getting the ball on defense, I don't see how this team's going to lose the rest of the way. And I'm saying that when they play Vanderbilt, Cincinnati, Memphis, UConn, and Navy. And those are all tough games. But the key here is that 4 of those are at home. The only game that they travel to is at UConn. So to me, I'm finding it really hard to figure out if Houston's going to lose a game this season. And we're going to be talking about Houston for a while because I think that they're going to win all 5 of those games. Again, I think they're the best team in the American. I think that they're going to be the team to clearly put in that New Year's 6. If we get chaos in some of the other conferences, maybe they have a shot. And I'm not saying that they have a shot right now. They need a whole lot of help. They need no undefeated teams in the Power 5. But I mean, they're a fun team to watch, and I'm looking forward to seeing them, continue playing the way that they are on both offense and defense.
And I agree with you. It's Houston is good. They I was looking at their schedule a little bit more, and I looked at their remaining games, and I wrote them down, I guess like you did, and I just wrote in my notes undefeated question mark. But then I looked at the games that they played, and I thought, well, maybe they're not getting as much buzz because look at the 7 teams that they played against: Tennessee Tech, Louisville, Texas State, Tulsa, SMU, Tulane, and UCF. A lot of teams could go 7-0 against those teams. But we'll see. I agree with you, though. Houston is the class of the G5 for me right now. And while we're still on the subject of the American, we're going to switch things over to Memphis, who had a Friday night game at Tulsa. I got to watch a good bit of this while eating ribs at Dreamland Barbecue. Paxton Lynch and crew, they had a really complete offensive game all around, but their defense is a cause of concern for me because they've had 3 opponents this year score at least 40 points. And Memphis as a whole, they're 110th in the NCAA in yards allowed per game. So we know they're a team that can put points on the board, but they have kind of the defense of an old Pac-10 team. But hey, they're scoring the most points all year. This is the highest scoring game so far in college football. I think that's 108 points so far. Again, I think just like with all these other American teams, they got to stay red because one loss and they're out. But Memphis looks pretty good on their own.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Paxton Lynch is an absolute superstar at Memphis right now, and that's the same thing that I was going to come here and say, is that their defense is going to be the bane of their existence the rest of the way. They have that tough 3-game stretch coming up. They should get past Tulane. It's a similar team to Tulsa, but then they got that Navy at Houston at Temple. They could lose 2 of those games simply because if they make a bad mistake on special teams or defense, it wasn't even just the defense, it was the special teams as well, they're just going to give the ball back to these good offenses, and they can go down the field and easily get a touchdown on Memphis. And I think Paxton Lynch is good enough to win these games, but for how long? How many times is he going to be able to do that?
Sure, and people are talking about that Paxton Lynch is potentially the best quarterback in this year's draft class, and we'll see going forward how that turns out. But again, for me, their remaining schedule, especially with away games at Houston and at Temple, I think Memphis is a better team than Temple. And if I had to rank these 3 AAC teams, it sounds like you'd be in the same boat. It'd be Houston, Memphis, then Temple.
Yeah, and I agree. And even though I go Houston, Memphis, Temple, again, I think that Memphis could lose to Temple because I feel like all 3 of these teams bring different things to the table that they can win certain games. So when you have home games against these teams, it really will help you. And Houston avoids Temple, Memphis doesn't. We'll see how that plays out. But that Houston-Memphis game in a couple weeks is going to be a game that we'll definitely be talking about.
Sure, but what really separates them for me is the one thing that Temple doesn't have that Houston and Memphis have is that Temple doesn't have an elite quarterback.
Exactly.
They have a good running back in Jihad Thomas, but going forward, they're going to be unable to consistently put points on the board like Memphis and Houston do.
Yeah, it's a matter of whether they can keep up with those Houston and Memphis offenses, which are both top 10 offenses in the country.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to slide things over to a P5 conference. We're going to talk about the ACC right now, and we're going to open things up with Clemson, who we had them as a yellow with an asterisk. And I talked about it last week that I needed to see a statement win from them before I really got on board and got on the bandwagon with them, and this was it. Yes, they beat Miami. Yes, Miami fired their coach. Yes, Miami's not a great team. But I sat down, I DVR'd about 15 games this weekend and watched them. I stopped watching this after the first quarter.
Oh, yeah. Why would you keep watching?
It was an absolute blowout. And you feel for Al Golden because Miami's really never recovered from those NCAA sanctions. But Clemson really in control of the ACC right now.
Yeah, and the one thing about that, I stopped watching. It was with my setup, it was my main TV, the big TV with the sound game that I had at the start. I switched it over to my tiny little laptop after about 3 drives because that game was going nowhere fast. But the one thing about that game is they showed during College Game Day right beforehand that there was a little bit of chippiness between these teams, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, Miami's bringing that, that Catholics versus conflict, convicts type of mentality from the '80s against those Notre Dame teams into this Clemson game right now. So I thought that they were going to come out, and I thought they were going to play a very good game against Clemson. It took them one drive to look like they completely gave up. There was only one linebacker, and I couldn't catch the name on the back of the jersey, but there was only one linebacker on Miami that looked like he even wanted to be on that field on the first drive of the game. I mean, they literally did not show up, and that's a big reason why their coach got fired at this game, because that's on the coach. The coach is the one that's got to get these guys fired up and wanting to play. But staying away from Miami, talking about how good Clemson was, that one trick play, which I'm sure you saw in the highlights, and it was early in the first quarter when Miami still had, I guess, players on the field, getting pretty creative, having all offensive linemen not move. Miami, it looked like they thought that they were offside, so they all stumbled before they got to the quarterback, and then they got 5 blockers running down with the running back the whole way. And if Dabo can keep pulling those types of tricks, out of his hat and scoring 58 points, and he's not going to score 58 points a game, but the Clemson offense looked very good. The defense obviously shut them out. This was a very complete team on Saturday.
Absolutely. For me, that's still got to stay somewhere in the yellow or yellow star, because we'll both say that the ACC is kind of on the weaker side. Maybe not as weak as the Pac-12, actually. But I think, depending on how things shake out, Clemson's still got to play through some tough games the rest of the way. So I'm good with leaving them with the yellow with an asterisk this week. How about you?
And I'm fine leaving that on there only because they have NC State and Florida State coming up, and those are the 2 biggest games they have left on their regular season schedule. I want to see how they look in those 2 games before we either take the highlight off or we could take the star off next week if they have a convincing win on the road against North Carolina State. But for now, I say just leave them alone, because very convincing win. Like you said, it's the first very convincing win of the season. It came against a team that just didn't even look like they were on the field, so you wonder how much of that's going to translate into the North Carolina State and Florida State games. I'm fine leaving them the same for now.
Well, we're going to move right into Florida State. And Florida State was really, before we get down to the Pac-12 and Utah, Florida State was the big upset of the weekend, given that the Pac-12 game was, I think, Thursday or Friday night. But the Florida State game, they lost 22-16, and Florida State, they've had question marks all year. But I watched a lot of this game, and I didn't see anything remarkable from either team. You finally got to see Everett Golson turn the ball over, which was amazing that he had an all year after what he was doing back at Notre Dame. But Dalvin Cook had a really quiet game, so that was kind of surprising for me. But how about that finish, Tim?
I mean, it was an unbelievable finish. I was watching the Ohio State game, obviously, but I'll admit I switched that game over to the main TV for that final drive, because I thought this was going to be a great statement drive by Florida State. We talked about Robert Aguayo last week. He's lining up for a 56-yarder. I'm thinking, it's game over, Florida State, because I'm thinking, Chris Blewett just kicked the 56-yarder for Pitt the week before. Another ACC kicker hitting another 56-game winner. That block was tremendous. And getting the ball, having the wherewithal to get the ball and start running down the field. But Florida State, make a tackle.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got your big uglies in on the line. When you're kicking a field goal that long, your best athletes on the field are your kicker. And you can't put anything past Aguayo. He had to kick that low. His line just didn't do it for him. And we'll talk some more, and we'll hear some more from this kick later on. But for me, Florida State, they're not out of it yet. They can still beat Clemson. They can still win the ACC very easily. But for me, they have to go down to red.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with the change to red. And I know that we had them at yellow star, which theoretically means that a loss to the wrong team knocks you out. But it was a loss at the wrong time. And meaning that they're not out yet because it was an early enough loss. They can redeem themselves with the Clemson win. They can get into the final. We'll talk about the Pac-12. They don't have an undefeated team anymore. So you get Florida State one-loss team still has a shot, but they do need that chaos to happen in college football. They need a lot to happen, and they need a lot to happen quick.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to stick in the ACC, and we're going to take things up to the Duke at Virginia Tech game, and this was one of
What a game.
one of two 4 overtime games that we got on the same day, which is surprising to say the least. Now, Duke had the number 4 defense in the nation coming into this game, and we saw touchdowns on the first 3 drives of the game between these teams, so you thought it was going to be a blowout. Well, even after 4 OTs with a score of only 45-43, that didn't happen. But Virginia Tech really stayed in this game. They chipped away. They had such a weird stat line. I was looking at the quarters. It was like something like 6, 8, and 2.
Yeah.
They ended up tying this game between the second through fourth quarters. They chipped away, and Duke right now, they're sitting up there with Pitt and Carolina atop the Coastal Division, and those are the toughest 2 teams left on Duke's schedule. And Duke's got that one loss earlier in the season to Northwestern. But my question for you is, does this victory over Virginia Tech, does this say more about the quality of the Duke program and what David Cutcliffe has done down there? Or is it saying more about the quality of the ACC Coastal Division?
I mean, I think it says a little bit about both. I don't really know what type of team Duke is right now. It's hard to pinpoint. I mean, they have a good defense. It says a little bit about both because the Coastal, you have a lot of just mediocre to bad teams in the Coastal. And really the only Coastal team that I can say good things about right now is Pittsburgh. I just don't know what type of team Duke is right now. I think we're going to find out. Even with the Miami game, I think Miami's going to respond after that Clemson loss and play a better game with a new coach in there and actually show up. The UNC and Pitt game is going to show me a little bit, but they just haven't really done anything for me to say that they're a legitimate contender. You can't knock them out for a win against Virginia Tech. We can knock them out pretty soon, though, even if they win the next 3 games. I just don't know what type of team Duke is right now.
Well, that's going to be the same for me. You know, Duke was red coming into this week, 1 loss, and they're pretty much guaranteed out with that earlier loss to Northwestern. But I'm going to go ahead and move it on because all 3 of these ACC Coastal teams won this week, and we had 3 in red, in Duke and UNC and Pitt. But moving to Virginia at North Carolina, UNC won 26-13. But the surprising thing that many people probably don't realize that North Carolina has quietly ripped off 6 victories in a row since losing that college football opener to South Carolina 17-13. And yeah, I'll give you that 2 of those wins were against FCS teams in Delaware and NC-A&T. But for me, North Carolina has an argument for being ranked right now. And they've got an outstanding defense that's allowed 24 points in the second half across 5 FBS games. 24 points across 5 games in the second half. That's outstanding. And of course, we're going to see how good they are, as you mentioned, when they face off against Pitt on Thursday and Duke the following weekend. But UNC is not a bad team.
Yeah, and I agree. You know, Pitt's my favorite team in the Coastal right now in terms of how well they're playing, but North Carolina is definitely behind them, and I'm looking forward to seeing that game on Thursday. Unfortunately, I didn't get to watch the game on Saturday because there's just too many games. I only have 5 TVs.
I believe it was on ESPN3.
It was, but you know, there were at the 3:30 time slot. There were about 8 games going on, so I was doing a lot of switching. North Carolina and Toledo are the only 2 teams I did not see any action of this weekend. But yeah, I mean, it's part of the reason why I didn't watch them is almost a compliment to them because they're a boring defensive team. And, you know, we're talking about Houston and getting excited about them. We're talking about Memphis, getting excited about them, getting excited about a Clemson 58-0 win. That's not North Carolina. They're not a sexy offensive type team. I'm looking forward to seeing them against Pitt, you know, seeing how they can do against that running game and Tyler Boyd. But yeah, I think that they're clearly a better team than Duke. Of the 3 teams, I think Duke's just the one that I'm just like, I don't really know. I don't know why we have them as a playoff contender. It's only because they've lost 1 game. And like you said, they have won 6 games in a row. 2 of them are basically non-opponents in North Carolina, A&T, and Delaware. And the other wins still aren't against great teams out of Illinois, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Virginia. But these next couple games, when they're playing at Pitt, followed by Duke, Miami, at Virginia Tech, at North Carolina State, that would be a very impressive way to end an 11-game winning streak to me.
Absolutely.
If they can do it.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned that Pitt and UNC. We're going to move right to them. Pitt won at Syracuse 23-20 with a field goal. And, Pitt came into this game with only one loss, and that was to Iowa a month ago, undefeated Iowa. And Pitt's another team, they're not blowing anyone out, but they're winning close games like UNC, and the only thing that matters is the win. And I went through and I calculated up Pitt's margin of victory across their 6 wins. It's exactly at 7 points. But you know what? They're winning. The thing for me with Pitt is they still have UNC, Notre Dame, Duke, and Louisville on the schedule.
And Miami to finish it off.
And Miami.
If you want to count them as a team.
Well, between them, have you still got Pitt being your best one?
I still have Pitt being my best one. I watched this whole Pittsburgh-Syracuse game, and it was, from beginning to end, it was to me the most fun game to watch this week. And it didn't have a lot of offense. You don't think of a 23-20 game being, oh my God, that game was fun to watch. You think like Baylor playing TCU is going to be fun because they're going to get 150 points. But it was fun in the sense that both offenses played well and both defenses played well. And that's kind of a weird thing to say about one game. But there were a lot of those third and short type situations in this game that got you very interested. Half the time they'd get them, half the time they wouldn't. It was very back and forth. It was a lot of ground and pound between both teams. Then you saw guys like Tyler Boyd and Ishmael from Syracuse making big plays. I mean, Tyler Boyd is an absolute weapon for this Pittsburgh team. And they would not be where they are right now if it wasn't for Tyler Boyd. And that reminds me of an old Pittsburgh team that had Larry Fitzgerald. And it's similar because that team had no quarterback either. And that's the problem I have with Pitt right now is that I don't trust Nate Peterman late in the game. The biggest pass of this game was from the Corned Beef Player of the Week runner-up, punter. Fantastic play. I jumped off my seat after that because it was just a fun play to watch. They have a tough 3 games coming up though, and we've talked about all 3 of these teams, and all 3 of these teams are playing each other in the next 3 weeks. We have a good old-fashioned ACC Coastal round robin coming up because you have Pitt home against UNC on Thursday. Then you have Duke and UNC playing each other the following week, and then it's Pitt and Duke the week after that. So we're only going to be talking about one of these teams going forward after 3 weeks. If that, because Pitt also has Notre Dame in between that UNC and Duke game. We're going to find out a lot about Pitt. This is a really fun team for me to watch because if you like well-rounded teams that have good running game, a flashy wide receiver because they don't exactly have a great passing game per se, and a great defense, then Pitt's a good team to root for right now.
We are going to move along. I think we're going to keep all 3 of those red for the time being.
Yeah, they all won. They all deserve to stay in that red category.
Absolutely. We're going to move on to the Big 12 and talk about Baylor, one of our undefeated teams at Iowa State. Baylor won the game 45-27. I don't have a whole lot to say about this game other than the fact that it's a shame that Baylor's lost Seth Russell, who's one of, if not the best QB in the nation. Tim, do you think that they can keep up the high energy and their 60-point games with Jarrett Stidham under center?
Without a doubt. Because to me, when I heard the Seth Russell news, to me I felt terrible for Seth Russell, but not for Baylor. Because they have so many good players on this team still that even with what's his name?
Jarrett Stidham?
Jarrett Stidham. So thank you. Even with him behind center, I have all the faith that Corey Coleman, Shock Linwood, they're going to carry this team still. And Jarrett Stidham was the number 3 recruit out of high school. So Art Briles knows how to bring big-time quarterbacks in and coach big-time quarterbacks. And you never want to see your quarterback go down. I'm an Ohio State fan. I had to deal with this twice last year. You never want to see your quarterback go down because your whole body just deflates. And that's what Baylor fans did. But look at what Ohio State did last year. They lost Braxton Miller before the season even began. Season was over. They lose to Virginia Tech with JT Barrett. They lose him during the Michigan game. You got Cardell ain't going to class Jones coming in, and he wins you a national championship. And I think that Baylor still has that type of potential where I don't think it matters whether they have Seth Russell or Jarrett Stidham. Don't get me wrong, Seth Russell was a Heisman candidate. I thought he could have won the Heisman this year, so you feel terrible for the kid. They're not going to skip a beat, though. This is a very good team. They have a great offense, and I think they're going to keep putting up the same amount of points with Stidham back there, especially with the extra rest before they get Kansas State. He's going to get that experience before he gets to that Oklahoma State, and TCU gauntlet that comes up.
And certainly the good news for Russell is he's only a junior, so he can always come back next year. But then, hey, if Stidham plays out of his mind for the rest of the year, we may have a quarterback controversy on our hand. That's the thing I feel most unfortunately for him for. But
I know nothing about that.
Yeah, we'll see on that going forward. Our other Big 12 undefeated team was TCU. They had an off week this week, but they play Thursday night against West Virginia. I fully expect TCU to win. West Virginia has let me down in the Big 12, it seems, every game this year. They will not play defense, but we'll see, and we'll recap that one next week. So moving on to one of our one-loss teams, we've got Texas Tech at Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a yellow team. They won this game 63-27. And Oklahoma's been on an offensive tear. They put up 118 points since they lost to Texas a couple weeks ago. 118 points in two games for Oklahoma is nothing to shake your head at. You know, Samaje Perine had 201 yards, 4 touchdowns. Joe Mixon had 154 yards and 2 touchdowns. They've got a real two-headed monster at running back there. And for me, Oklahoma, they still have to be a yellow with that one loss to Texas. And they have a couple of what should be winnable games for them against Kansas and Iowa State. But then they hit, which we talked about last week, they hit Baylor away, TCU at home, and then Oklahoma State away. What did you see at Oklahoma?
Yeah, I mean, I had the same 2 running backs that you just mentioned down in my notes, Samaj Perine and Joe Mixon. I mean, Joe Mixon is a guy that he's been getting a lot of the workload lately because for some reason Oklahoma has not used Samaj Perine this year. He has not put up stats, and it's not his fault. They're not giving him any carries. All of a sudden you lose to Texas, and you're kind of rethinking how you're doing things a little bit, and they're starting to use Samaj Perine a lot more now. And look at what they've done, and like you said, look at what they've done offensively in those 2 games. We know that Baker Mayfield's good. You know that they have a good receiving core. Now they're getting the running backs into this game a little bit, and it's not even those 2. They've been using 4 or 5 running backs, at least lining up in formations. If Samaj Perine can start getting the production that he had last year, when you had Knight, who wasn't as good a quarterback as Baker Mayfield is this season, this is a dangerous team, and I think that this is where you can get a little bit of chaos that I've been talking about when I've mentioned Florida State and I've mentioned Houston and those types of teams that need that chaos. Oklahoma can cause that. They can beat Baylor. They can beat TCU. They can beat Oklahoma State. They can win out easily. So yeah, I think this is one of those teams that all those one-loss teams are looking at and hoping they lose to Baylor or TCU, but then beat the other one and kind of get some of those teams down to their level.
Are they still yellow and on the fence for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, one of those teams that I just talked about, part of that gauntlet, who's Oklahoma's going to finish the season with, is Oklahoma State. And as we mentioned earlier, Kansas played at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State had their homecoming this weekend, and certainly we had that tragedy at the homecoming parade, absolutely devastating. But this team really rallied around, and they came out to play. And yes, everyone should beat the crap out of Kansas, but out of Oklahoma State, you saw a punt block touchdown, you saw safety out of them, and you saw a backup quarterback get 5 touchdowns. I really like the look of this team.
Yeah, Oklahoma State over the years has been one of my favorite teams out of the Big 12 every year because they always have this type of team where they put up a lot of offensive productions, and I like doing the pew pew pew. But this was an emotional win for this Oklahoma State team too because you had that tragedy, and that person's being charged with second-degree murder right now for a car accident, so that there's something going on there, and they were able to play this game, and it just looked easy for them. Kansas is a terrible team. I'll give them that. I'll give any listeners that. But Oklahoma State looked impeccable in this game to the point that they had their B and their C teams come into the game in the second half, and they kept it going. So this is I wasn't sold on Oklahoma State too much going into this Saturday. I'm sold on them right now. I think that this upcoming week against Texas Tech is really going to be their first real test, though. Texas Tech is kind of one of those teams that, Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma, all played them, and you really get to see what type of teams those teams were when they played Texas Tech.
Because Texas Tech still put up 40-plus points on them.
Exactly, because you have Patrick Mahomes and you have, Devin Lauderdale and all these other receivers that Texas Tech has, and they're going to put so much offense on you that you have to respond both offensively and defensively. And I think that all four of these teams have responded on defense. And Oklahoma State, we'll see exactly what type of team they are when they travel to Lubbock on Saturday.
Absolutely. And for me, No Color, once again, our third undefeated in the Big 12. We are going to slide into the Big Ten and talk about Ohio State at Rutgers. Ohio State won this game 49-7. And Tim, I didn't watch this game, but I saw that JT Barrett and Zeke had really good stat lines, and I'll defer to you on this one. What are your takes on it?
I literally have two letters on my notes about Ohio State, and that's JT. This game was all JT Barrett. This is what, Ohio State fans have been waiting for JT Barrett to come in. I personally thought that JT Barrett should have been the starter in the preseason. I know I've said that to you a lot. I said all offseason I thought Cardell was going to get the starting, or I thought that JT was going to get the starting nod. He didn't. This is where we're going to see the Ohio State team the rest of the way. They're off this week, but they don't really, they play Minnesota and Illinois the following week, so it's just going to be JT kind of getting back into his groove a little bit. And JT and Cardell are two very different quarterbacks, and now you're going to get to see two very different offenses along with that. And, so I'm excited to see this. I think that they can, win out with JT. I think they have a better chance of winning out with JT, I should say, rather than Cardell. But you also know that you have Cardell if you need him. And that's kind of the comfort right now that, Urban, I think he was trying to give Cardell a little bit of playing time because he's the senior and JT will be back next season. But now it's time to start winning games, and that's what we did against Rutgers.
Well, No Color for Ohio State being undefeated, so we are going to move on to Indiana at Michigan State. And Michigan State won this ball game 52-26, but do not let that score line confuse you.
That score is wrong.
Indiana was in this game and only down 5 points until 5 minutes left. But Michigan State knocked in a couple late touchdowns. Connor Cook put up almost 400 yards. He had 4 touchdowns. But the stat for me was that 139 of those, I think 398 yards, were on third down. That is clutch for me. And then you look at a team like Indiana. They started out 4-0. They nearly had College Game Day there for Ohio State. And Indiana's just hit this stretch where they've lost 4, and they're 4-4 right now. But, Tim, what did you see out of State, especially with really only Ohio State left on their schedule?
Yeah, I saw the same thing I've seen in every game that I've seen Sparty play, and that's that they really struggle out of the gate, and they find ways to win, and that's exactly what they did again. Michigan State, I don't know if they're a good team or not. They're a good team. They're 8-0. They're winning games. I get it. They're a good team. Are they an undefeated team, though? They needed a miracle to beat Michigan. I had told you going into that game, I was rooting for Michigan to beat Michigan State because I felt that Michigan was a more quality win than Michigan State. Michigan State, to me, I just feel like they're a team that, they play at Nebraska, then they have Maryland before Ohio State. I can see them losing either one of those games. And those are two terrible teams. Michigan State, to me, Connor Cook's a great quarterback. He's, as we said in that terrible FF trivia question earlier, he's the winningest FBS quarterback that's active. Aaron Burbridge is pretty good, wide receiver. I just don't.
They've struggled against teams that aren't quality.
Exactly. And it's been every single team this season they have struggled against. They haven't had one game where they've just come out and said, yeah, Michigan State's going to win this game. You think in the first half of every game, this could be the game where Michigan State gets upset?
Well, being that they're undefeated, they will stay with No Color on our list. Moving on to Michigan, they had a bye week this week, so nothing out of them. The only thing that came out of Ann Arbor was a lot of great Harbaugh quotes, and I would encourage anyone to go and look them up. He had a lot of great things. He was talking about earthworms with machine guns and giving kids advice on how to get the most Halloween candy.
And in
But
case you wanted to know, Brady Hoke would not have gone for it on fourth down.
right,
At the same time, he would have been down by 30.
yeah, correct. They're still a red team with that one loss to Michigan State. Moving on to Iowa, they're a yellow team. They're undefeated. You know my thoughts about this team. I haven't seen quality from them. They were off this week. They've got Maryland next week. I still think that even though I don't believe them to be a great team, I think they've got a great shot at going undefeated until the Big Ten championship game. They're still a yellow team to me.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that they can win out here, and we talked about them a lot last week. We're going to talk about them, I feel, a lot every week because we just definitely disagree. Iowa was off, so let's take an off week on arguing about Iowa.
Well, we'll move on to the only independent who's in the hunt, and that's Notre Dame. They were off again, so that'll be 3 teams in a row for you. Another team with a bye. They'll face Temple this week, and Notre Dame still has Pitt, Wake, Boston College, and Stanford on the schedule. So no guarantees there, but if they win out, I could very easily see them being a playoff team.
And watching College Game Day, I know you were talking about the analysis and all that, but the one good point Herb Street made, 11-1 Notre Dame right now, if they win out, that's going to mess up the whole system. Because an 11-1 Notre Dame team is, you look at it right now, let's say Baylor, TCU, one of them's undefeated, gets in. Ohio State, Michigan, one of them's undefeated, gets in. Clemson, undefeated, gets in. And let's say LSU loses a game along the road. Are you going to leave the Pac-12 and the SEC out if a Notre Dame team has one loss? It's an interesting dynamic right now, and it's you can't talk about it too much right now because it's just something that's lurking in the shadows rather than it's a couple weeks away. We still have plenty of time, and a lot's got to play out before Notre Dame kind of steals a spot from a conference, but it's definitely a possibility right now.
Absolutely, but they'll still stay yellow for us this week. And we're going to move on to the MAC, one of the other G5 teams that still have a shot at it. You got Toledo at UMass. Toledo won this game 51-35, but Toledo came out flat once again. They were down 28-10 at the half, but they came back out after halftime. They outscored UMass 41-7 the rest of the way. But Toledo, for me, they're going to be hanging on to that win against who was ranked at the time very highly, top 15 if I'm maybe even top 10, somewhere around there, against that Arkansas team who has just looked like trash going from for the rest of the season from there. But Toledo's got remaining games against Northern Illinois, Central Michigan, Bowling Green, and Western Michigan. Will that be enough for them to be the top G5 team over a team like Houston?
I think that even if Toledo wins out and nobody in the American wins out, but you have a one-loss Houston or a one-loss Memphis or a one-loss Navy or a one-loss, who we haven't talked about because they lost early, or a one-loss Temple. I like those American teams better than Toledo. And I'm not going to pretend like I know a lot about Toledo. I haven't really watched them, but if you look at the stat lines and you look at the box scores, they have struggled against god-awful teams. And I just don't see how an undefeated Toledo gets a lot of recognition for that spot over teams that have played well the entire season and might have lost to a very good team. Toledo beat Arkansas. That's it. I mean, that's the only thing on their schedule that you can say that they did. Other than that, they're just playing. They're playing well for the MAC.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We're going to move on to the Pac-12. Washington at Stanford. Stanford's really the highlight of the Pac-12 right now, but they are one of those one-loss teams, so they are yellow in our poll. But Stanford won this game at home, 31-14, and I'll go ahead and get this out of the way. All Pac-12 teams now have at least one loss, so we have no shot at an undefeated Pac-12 team, and that's not good for the conference. But Stanford is playing so great, and people are saying that maybe they might even be in the top 4 even with a one loss right now against some of these other undefeated teams. But they're playing so great because of Christian McCaffrey. He had 109 rushing yards this week, 123 receiving yards. You add in his return yards, and he had 300 total. He's leading the country right now in all-purpose yards, and he's on pace right now to break Barry Sanders' all-purpose yardage record, which is incredible. He's a better back than Toby Gerhart was, in my opinion, and he's their story this year. What did you see? Did you get a chance to watch this game at all?
I got a chance to watch a little bit of it, and I mean Christian McCaffrey's a stud. I mean you have to talk about Christian McCaffrey being a Heisman candidate right now, and that's not a thing that a lot of people are saying because Stanford plays late. They play those 10:30 games, and you're not getting the exposure to the Christian McCaffrey unless you wake up Sunday morning, and you have people looking at the NFL by then. He's one of the best backs in the country, and he's putting up consistently unbelievable numbers. And I mean, Stanford, like I said before, I think they're the most complete team in the country, and I'm saying that over. And when I say a complete team, I'm talking rushing, passing, rush defense, pass defense, special teams. They're good at all five. They have all five down right now, and I just don't see how any of these teams are going to beat them. They have a big game at the end of the season, too, against Notre Dame, and that's going to be one of the more fun games coming up that you wouldn't expect to be coming up because it's a non-conference game in the last game of the season, before the conference championships at least. I think that if the Pac-12 is getting a team in, it's Stanford because I mean we'll talk about these other teams, but Stanford's the only one that I can say right now in the Pac-12, hey, I think this team is a legitimate playoff contender, and I hope you said earlier they got a tough game against Wazoo next week. This is a fun team to watch, and I'd like to see them keep playing as they are.
Well, absolutely, but they'll still stay yellow for me, and any two-loss Pac-12 team would be tough. But we will see going from there. That Notre Dame matchup is looming large, and looking forward to that one certainly. We're going to move on to Cal, who we had as a yellow team, and UCLA, who we had as a red star team. But we got out of this one. We got a big one. UCLA beat Cal 40-24 Thursday night, and you and I both watched a good portion of it. We chatted about it back on Thursday.
Yeah.
And Jared Goff of Cal and Josh Rosen of UCLA are two fantastic quarterbacks up there with all these other quarterbacks that we've talked about. Now, Rosen shined a little brighter with 399 yards compared to Goff's 295. Both of them had 3 touchdowns. Now, UCLA was the red star who had to win this game to stay in the conversation. And I'm not sure exactly what to do here. I'm leaning Cal out, being that they have 2 losses, and going ahead and putting UCLA out as well because they're both in the exact same spot to me now at 5-2. But then again, when you look at it, UCLA at 2-2 in the conference is right behind Utah, who's 3-1 in the Pac-12 South, and Cal is 3rd in theirs behind Stanford and Washington State. So I don't know if you want to talk about this game, but I kind of want to move on to talk about Utah next and make a decision with the Utah because I think they'll go hand in hand.
Well, one thing before we get to Utah, I was actually going to argue with you because you said that at 5-2 that they're the same, and like you said, they're not. UCLA still has a chance in the division. California doesn't. I came in prepared today. I was going to do some research and come in with a hot take about how everyone other than Stanford and Utah should be out right now. And I didn't come to that conclusion because I went back through every single BCS year to see, does a 2-loss team have a chance to make the playoff, as general as that is? And the answer is yes, they do. But
LSU did it under the BCS, if I recall.
Exactly. And the only way you can do that is if you win the conference, or if you win the conference championship. Other than that, you have no chance. That's why I'm almost going to just say a resounding California, you're out. But UCLA still has a chance to win the South Division, so it's hard to eliminate them as a 2-loss team and they still need a lot of help. This is not, I'm not saying that UCLA has a legitimate shot to get over Baylor or TCU or over Ohio State, Michigan State. They need a lot of upsets in order to have a chance. But UCLA is still in it because they're still in the conference hunt. If they fall out of the conference hunt, they're out. Because a 2-loss team that doesn't even make their conference championship is not going to get in. So that's why, we can go to Utah if you want. My recommendation would be to eliminate California, leave UCLA as the red star. I mean, I thought I was going to come into the conclusion that I was going to eliminate UCLA even with the win. I didn't come to that conclusion, though.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Actually, with the Red Stars simply being in the hunt, they are so borderline and 90% chance not going to make it. They would need a
Exactly.
lot of dominoes to fall their way, and I'm fine talking about them next week. So I'm fine with keeping UCLA in and getting rid of Cal, even though at first glance they're in the same exact position. But when you look at how the conferences can play out, they're not.
And yeah, and California's out. I mean, there's no way that California's winning that division. They lost this. I mean, they don't. There's just no way that California's going to win that division.
Well, we're going to move on to Utah, who is one of our undefeated teams, who lost at USC 42-24. And I watched this game. Utah could not get the ground game going at all. They threw 4 picks, of which 3, if I recall correctly, led to USC touchdowns, and that certainly didn't help. We both thought that Utah wouldn't ride the season out undefeated. We were both pretty sure of that. But no Pac-5 team is going off the board with just 1 loss quite yet. Tim, what have you got?
Yeah, I mean, Utah's obviously not. It's getting a highlight. They were unhighlighted last week, meaning they controlled their own destiny. That's not the case anymore. We're moving them to at least a yellow this week, if you agree with that, because there's only 2 teams. I mean, we talk about there's no teams in the Pac-12 with 0 losses. There's only 2 teams in the Pac-12 with 1 loss. I mean, you look at the ACC has 5, the Big 12 has 4, the American Athletic Conference has more than the Pac-12 right now. It's Utah still winning the division, still has a chance to win the conference, still has a chance to get in. But I put them on the same boat. They're in the same boat as Stanford right now, because right now you look at it as Utah and Stanford are ready to play each other in that last week of the season in that conference championship.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got to
They
be
both win out.
right. They've got to be another red team, even though they're sitting solidly in first place in their division. But we're going to move on to Washington State at Arizona. Arizona was another one of those red teams for us, and Arizona lost this game to Washington State. I was pretty excited for this, being that it was my upset pick last week, and I talked a good bit about the play of Washington State quarterback Luke Falk in my slider segment. And again, Wazoo's in the hunt for that Pac-12 North title. But since this is, we do have to talk about Arizona a little bit. We had them still in contention. They came close in this one, and they couldn't get an onside kick at the very end of the game. But now going forward for Arizona, they've got a quarterback controversy at their hands over who can be less ineffective between Randall and Solomon. And I really have nothing more to say about Arizona other than the fact that they're out for me.
Yeah, I mean, I really have nothing to say about Arizona. I didn't think they were a good team going into this game. I didn't watch the game. It doesn't matter. Goodbye, Wildcats.
All right, well, we are going to hit to our last conference in college football for this week. We're going to talk about the SEC. Open it up with Florida, who had a bye week. They still really remain in great shape, even coming off that loss to LSU. They're leading the East right now, in control of their own destiny, headed into the world's largest outdoor cocktail party versus Georgia. They're still a yellow team, but they still look fine to me.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, they lost in one of the toughest college football environments that you can play in at LSU. The Georgia game will be big for them because, to me, not including the Florida Atlantic or Florida State, because clearly they're the same level as I say them together. But in terms of your SEC schedule, Georgia, Vandy, and at South Carolina, Georgia's your toughest game left in that SEC schedule, and they actually have a chance to all but clinch the East if they win this game against Georgia, because if they beat Georgia on Saturday, the only other team that has a mathematical chance at winning the division is Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, which they're not going to. So, Florida, you win on Saturday. Congratulations, you're in the SEC championship.
And I believe Vanderbilt plays a G5 team this week. I'm blanking on who they play, but they are.
Yeah, they play Houston.
Yeah, they are not favored.
Yes, they're heavy underdog.
Well, we're going to move on to Tennessee at Alabama, third Saturday in October. Alabama for me. I was at this game. Fantastic atmosphere. Love going to this game. We saw a really solid late 5-minute left, fourth quarter drive from Alabama to seal this away. You saw 3 missed field goals from Tennessee. Granted, they were long field goals. I think 2 of them were in excess of 50 yards.
Yeah, there was only one that I thought that they should have made.
I thought that was kind of the story here. But for me, Alabama absolutely needs the bye this week coming into the LSU game. And I'm still fine keeping Alabama at yellow, and they can do just fine the rest of the way. They could still even make the playoffs with some teams with some chips falling the right way and being a one loss non-conference, didn't even make the conference champion. But we'll see how they go. But for me, every team is going to have a real gut check, grind out a victory game, and it seems to be Tennessee is that game for Alabama every single year.
Yeah, I was watching this game, and obviously, you're going to keep them at yellow. Alabama, if you look at the whole season, is still one of the best teams in the country, and that our top tens have proved that because we didn't do anything with Alabama, even though they just looked sluggish. But they absolutely need this bye, and you better fire Scott Cochran, the director of strength and conditioning, because they looked exhausted out on that field against Tennessee, and Danielson was saying it the entire game, and he was absolutely right. They had the hands on the hips on defense. They just looked out of it. They didn't look bad. They just looked tired.
Well, I will disagree with you there because Scott Cochran is probably my favorite person on Alabama's staff, and his screams of yeah, 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 they play him in the stadium the entire game. He's been with Saban since LSU, and they're not going to get rid of him. But Alabama looked good when it counted, and that was when Tennessee got the ball with a minute or two left, and they made those tackles for loss, forced the fumble, and they looked fine.
Exactly, and that's why I prefaced it with they did not look bad. They just looked very tired, and having that week off before really the biggest game on their season, because Auburn's not really the same Auburn. That LSU game is one of the biggest games on the college football calendar the rest of the season. So it's good that they're getting that week off.
Well, Alabama wins 19-14. They're going to stay yellow. We're going to move to Ole Miss at Texas A&M. A&M was a yellow team with one loss to Alabama, and Ole Miss really shut the door on at Kyle Field and won 23-3. And this was our only ranked matchup of the day, but you really couldn't tell. I saw no inspirational stat lines on either side, unless you want to talk about Ole Miss's defense. They were after Kyle Allen all freaking day. And A&M, for me, has got to learn how to run the football because their passing game has completely suffered as a result. And personally, I wasn't really sure what to do with him here, but I was thinking I'm leaning them out because we put Ole Miss out with 2 losses. A&M just lost to Ole Miss. So for me, they're out of the hunt.
Yeah, and I'm not on the fence. I think that they're out. I think that the Ole Miss losses are different only because one of those losses is Memphis, and if you get Ole Miss can still win this division this conference.
Absolutely.
And it's going to bring a whole lot of arguments because you're going to bring it's a 2-loss Ole Miss. Oh, but they lost to Memphis. So we're not going to put an SEC team in then. And so Ole Miss, if you hate the SEC, you're rooting for Ole Miss right now.
Absolutely. Ole Miss winning out would be the worst thing in the world for the SEC.
It would be the worst.
The SEC probably doesn't make the playoffs.
They definitely don't. Because you assume that then they beat a Florida team who would then also have 2 losses. So
they would beat LSU.
Exactly.
On the way there.
Exactly. So it's an interesting. Texas A&M has no chance at winning this division, and it's not even. They've lost to 2 good teams. They've lost to Alabama. They've lost to Ole Miss, but both have been at Kyle Field.
Yeah.
You're not getting into the playoff if you can't win at home against in these big games.
Or keep it close at home even.
Exactly, because then who says that you're going to go to the Sun Bowl and not the Sun Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl and be able to beat Ohio State and Baylor and TCU and Oklahoma? You're not going to beat those teams. So I think that Texas A&M, for me, that was easy. I think they're out.
All right. Well, I agree. Finally, last team to talk about this week, Western Kentucky at LSU. LSU, one of the only other unbeaten teams that we will talk about. LSU won 48-20 in this one in a really sloppy, rain-filled game down in the Bayou. And Western Kentucky's a good team, but they really were no match. Fournette got his 100-plus yards, and I wrote in my notes, LSU passing game looks all right, ? They had 286 yards in the air, but what kind of concerned me when I look back at it, Western Kentucky still put up 325 yards in the air, which was kind of shocking. I thought LSU was supposed to have a good defense, but Western Kentucky could put points on the board. I didn't expect him to get that much yardage.
Well, I did because if you look at Brandon Doty's stats all season, they're Western Kentucky. The only reason that we even talk about them being a good team is because they have a tremendous passing game. I thought that LSU would win that game around that same score. I thought it was going to be a high-scoring game. I knew that LSU was going to have to put up points. Western Kentucky has won games because they just put up so many passing yards. And I do agree. I think that if there was going to be a game where Western Kentucky did not put up those types of passing yards, it was going to be in a rain-filled game against an LSU defense.
Well, that'll about wrap it up for them. LSU is still no color being an undefeated team. How many teams do we still have left in the hunt by your calculations, Tim? I know we eliminated Texas A&M and Arizona this week.
And California. So we are now down to 24 teams.
24 teams. All right. Well, I'm going to take us into the next segment. This is kind of our feel-good or feel-emotional story of the week. This is going to be about Eddie George. Former All-American, 1995 Heisman winner, Ohio State running back Eddie George. Now, many people don't know that Eddie grew up in a single-parent household in Philadelphia. He grew up a huge Penn State fan. His single mom worked multiple jobs, including roles as a Ford production manager, a flight attendant, and also as a fashion model. Now, growing up, his mom would take him on flights across the world. Being that she was a flight attendant, he had some of those opportunities. She also took him to a lot of musical productions. He went to Catholic school in Philadelphia, but due to peer pressure and his intense dedication to sports, his grades started to slip down to C's and D's and F's. So his mom sent him to military academy in Virginia. I believe it's called Fork Union. He'd go on from there at Fork Union to Ohio State, where he would set multiple rushing records and enter the College Football Hall of Fame a few years ago. He went to the NFL, had a great 9-year career with the Oilers and Titans. He made the Pro Bowl, I think it was 4 times. But after football, life wasn't so easy for Eddie. He's told the media multiple times that he suffered from depression, and he's had his own demons that he's had to battle. But nowadays, you'll see him all over on television, hosting pregame shows. You'll see him on Fox. And it may seem surprising to you, but for those who know Eddie, it's not. He's performed in Othello, Julius Caesar, and other Nashville Shakespeare Festival performances over the past few years. But the real crowning achievement for me is that Eddie will be making his New York Broadway debut coming up. So watch out for the production of the famed musical Chicago, with Eddie stepping into the role of attorney Billy Flynn in January of 2016. Congrats, Eddie.
Yeah, and I love Eddie George. I know a lot of that backstory that you were talking about after playing in the NFL with the depression and all that. I've seen this story on Twitter. I didn't even know this was going to be your pretty good story of the week. So Eddie George was my first favorite player. He was the player at Ohio State when I was first getting into college football. So Eddie George will always be my number one college football player, and I have already looked for tickets on Broadway.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. He certainly deserves it. He's had a good career. I'm going to slide us into some hot takes, our second of 2 hot take segments this week. And what I'm going to be talking about this week, we're going to talk about head coaches. And we've got 7 head coaching spots open in college football right now, and we're 1 game past the midway point of the season. You've got Southern Cal, South Carolina, Miami, Maryland, Illinois, UCF, and North Texas. It's so shocking to me that the money in college football is absolutely insane and has driven to these quick reactions and your must-win-now attitudes. For example, with Miami firing Al Golden this weekend, the word is that Miami has to pay about a $7 million buyout. Waiting until the end of the season to fire him, they would have paid about $3 million. Wow. That's a huge difference. That's $4 million. Now, granted, we don't know how much kind of money that Miami puts into the football team, being that it's a public school, but college football is really starting to feel like the NFL. You'll see a domino effect that once a big-name school is open, everyone else has to get into the jump for hiring a big name and getting a top-ranked recruiting class. But the problem is, for me right now, the only people that are looking for a job are either unemployed or trying not to get fired at their own coaching job. So it doesn't make sense to me. These coaches leaving in the middle of the season, you don't always see it work out. You saw Ed Orgeron do it at USC a few years ago. His players rallied around him. Maybe USC it's happening because they just beat Utah with an interim head coach. But it doesn't give a chance for these coaches to leave the team and leave their players on a good term. And that's my hot take, Tim. What have you got there?
And I'm not going to respond to that only because my hot take is extraordinarily similar to yours, where you have coaches now retiring in the middle of the season when their team starts not playing well. First you had last week, you had Steve Spurrier, and, we're happy to have him earlier on the show for a spooky, scary skeletons. But, he says that he left because he wanted to leave the team in good hands. What does he care? What does he care if he leaves South Carolina in good hands? He'd quit on that team. And players will go to Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma because of the name of the school. Who goes to South Carolina to be part of the South Carolina brand? The South Carolina brand was Steve Spurrier.
He built that program.
He was that program. You look at the coaches before him. You had Lou Holtz. Okay, you had Lou Holtz for 5 seasons. That left with a brawl, by the way. And then you had Brad Scott, Sparky Woods, Joe Morrison, and Richard Bell. Who the hell are those guys? And you're going to tell me that all of a sudden now the South Carolina head coaching job is like one of these top jobs in the nation? No, it's just an SEC school. You changed the brand from the Steve Spurrier brand, which those kids went to South Carolina to be coached by Steve Spurrier, to now the South Carolina brand that was formerly coached by Sparky. Then you have George O'Leary quitting on UCF, and we talked about them earlier with the season they had 2 years ago, making the Fiesta Bowl, beating Baylor, being 10th ranked. All of a sudden, his team's 0-8, and he gives up. You only have to coach 4 more games. 4 more games. And he's saying the same thing, that he wants to leave UCF in the same good hands with somebody else. Whose hands are you leaving this to? You're leaving it to the interim coach, the interim head coach, to just coach the rest of the 4 games. And by the way, there's rumblings that they got another probation come in after the 2012 recruiting scandal that he was doing the same thing. You don't go to UCF. You go to UCF for 2 reasons. 1, it's in Florida, and 2, because it was coached by George O'Leary. And these guys just quit on these players, and I'm curious to see how many recruits, especially with South Carolina, because UCF is not as big a school, but especially with South Carolina, how many recruits change their commitments out of South Carolina and into other teams, because that shows you how many of these guys are currently on South Carolina that they decided to play for a coach who quit. And did Spurrier, recruit the guys saying, hey, I'm retiring soon? I don't know. I'm not going to say yes or no, but I'm going to guess no.
Well, we certainly thank Steve for showing up this week for the tailgate and playing us a good song. However, I'm going to play you guys something that I found fantastic this week. And if you hopefully give it a listen here.
This year from over 50 yards. He's 3 of 3 tonight, but those were all inside of 40. From the left hash, 56-yarder, just like last week against Pittsburgh. Kick is blocked. Georgia Tech blocks it. The Jackets pick it up back in the 25, and Austin is returning it down the left sideline. Past the 50, past the 30, inside the 20, and he scores! He scores! Lance Austin picked up the block kick and returned it all the way to the house of the north end zone. We've had the miracle on North Avenue. This is the miracle on Techwood Drive.
And the students are flooding the field. What an ending.
I certainly hope you enjoyed that. I love hearing home radio announcers, the passion in their voice that they display. And certainly that Pitt over Georgia Tech, following the Michigan State over Michigan, what a past 2 weeks for ending of big-time games.
Yeah, and I mean that one. I mean, you compare it to Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan was obviously still in the playoff hunt, but they weren't undefeated. And we talked about last week. I put these on Twitter. I called both of us out on Twitter on Saturday after this happened because I had said that Clemson versus Florida State was the college football quarterfinal, and obviously that's not the case anymore. I thought it was a guarantee that Florida State was, going to win out, and I called you out on the Clemson as well with the Clemson Miami. So I called us out on the Atlantic Division games. But I mean, what a finish! I said earlier I thought Robert Aguayo was going to make it from 56 yards, or at least be close. And like you said, it had to be a low kick because with those long kicks, you can't just kick it up. But great play by Georgia Tech, and that's a long touchdown too. The Michigan State touchdown wasn't that long.
Well, that's why we love the game. You never know what can happen. We can ponder and speculate all we want, but until these teams get in there and play 60 minutes, you never know what's going to happen. So we're going to take a look ahead to Week 8, and we're going to talk about, Tim, what games are you looking forward to? What are you going to do? I'll tell you, for me, I'm looking at that UNC at Pitt game for some clarity. UNC's favored by 3. I'm looking at Georgia at Florida for a little more SEC clarity. Maybe Florida can really wrap up the East this weekend. And for me, really, my only plans involve me on the couch because Bama's on the bye this week. I'm going to be watching a lot of games.
Yeah, we got Bama on bye. We got the Buckeyes on bye. So I feel like we'll be talking all day Saturday, too. I had the North Carolina Pitt I'm very much looking forward to, especially being a Thursday night game. I'm also looking forward to seeing those American Athletic Conference teams play some big-name schools, Vanderbilt traveling to Houston, Notre Dame traveling to Temple. So I'm looking forward to those games. I mentioned earlier I'm looking forward to Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, just to see exactly how good the Pokes are. And in a little bit of an upset, I'm looking forward to Tennessee Martin at Arkansas because Bielema says that he faces tough opponents every week. So I'm interested to see just how tough Tennessee Martin is.
Go Skyhawks. Really, one of our last segments here, we're going to talk about our upset picks. Last week I won in the Washington State upset over Arizona. We both pick a at least 7-point dog. And Tim, we've got slim pickings this week, but we're both 3-5 on the season. And I've got 3 down in my notes here. And I'm just going to throw a dart. I'm going to say Clemson at NC State. I'll take the Wolfpack.
Wow.
Plus 10.
That's a big upset.
Carter Finley's a tough place to play. I think the ACC's in chaos right now, and it always seems like some team goes to NC State late in the season and loses a big game. So I'm going with the Wolfpack.
Well, I'm not going with an equal upset there. I'm going with we got a classic Sun Belt, Fun Belt rivalry clash this weekend. I'm taking UL Monroe plus 11.5 over UL Lafayette. The only reason being, like you said, it's slim pickings this week. Both teams are so terrible that I'd rather just take a bad team to play another bad team this week and hope that maybe I hit it. I mean, they've combined for 3 wins this season. It's going to be an awful game. I don't know why I picked it because now I have to pay attention. But go UL Monroe.
Yeah, that would be UL Monroe picking up their 2nd win of the season to improve to 2-6, if I recall correctly. I looked at that game. I also considered Ole Miss at Auburn, Auburn plus 7.5, and then Stanford at Wazoo plus 12. I wanted to do that so bad with Luke Falk, but I don't want to go with him so many weeks in a row.
Yeah, the other game that I considered was South Florida plus 7.5 over Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly, I mean, Navy could win that game, but I just feel like USF is a very underrated team. We haven't talked. I don't even think we mentioned them in either of our first 2 podcasts out of the American Athletic because there's a lot of good teams in that conference right now, and I think they're an underrated team that could handle that Navy option. But I'm sticking with UL Monroe.
All right. Well, let's hit the final segment. Drinking game. You want to guess, or do you want me to? Or you want me to guess, or do you want to tell me how much you drank?
I had about 4 beers, but I'd say about 3/4 of that was me taking extra sips.
My keyword was defense.
Yes, and there were a couple times. There were a couple times where I forgot to press the horn because I got into my takes or wasn't paying too much attention to it, but it was every time that we talked about a defensive performance.
All right. Well, good beans. And Tim, that will just about wrap it up from us here at Tuesday Night Tailgate. If you like what you heard, if you hated what you heard, or if you have any questions or ideas for the show, leave a comment on this YouTube video or reach us on Twitter at @TheTNTPod or send us an email at tuesdaynighttailgate@gmail.com. So from me, Luke, and from Tim up in Connecticut, happy Halloween, enjoy your week, and we'll save you a cold one at the next tailgate where we will be joined by Coach Al Golden.
See you
Good
next
night.
Tuesday.